Business leaders are becoming increasingly concerned and outspoken about populist legislation being imposed on commerce in South Africa. Herman Mashaba, who's the chief executive of Libatzi Investments, joins us now for more. Herman, my pronunciation was right, eh?
Yes.
Alec didn't have to do that.
Well, we know when to pass the ball and the hospital passes or not.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Herman.
No, thank you very much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Very true, but naturally, like last week, we see, as mentioned earlier, that there's an increasing voice coming from the private sector and significant leaders from the private sector who have a lot of respect in the industry, speaking out about the populist legislation in the market. What do you make of it? Because I understand that you've also had a few statements to make about this.
Well, I think, I'm sure Alec is very quite aware that I've really been quite vocal about labor legislation for many years, for the last 10 years. Actually, starting back from the days when Tito when he was the Minister of Labour at the time. I actually remember one time actually bouncing in his office, expressing my concern with this draconian labor legislation at the time that they were discussing. And here is it, 15 or so years later, as a country, we're sitting with one of the highest unemployment rates in the developed countries. So I think this is no longer just really a theoretical matter. This is a life situation threatening the lives of our poor people. And also at the same time, it's a country failing dismally with producing small businesses in this country. So it is no longer just really a theoretical situation. It is a really life-threatening matter that I believe, as South Africans, if we're going to keep quiet about this, we're going to be really failing our political leadership, because we have failed them in the past by giving the impression that we're happy with how things were developing, and we're not happy. So I think I believe it's a really high time for us to really start the serious engagement before the country collapses.
Herman, we know all these things. We know the labor legislation is appalling. Why is nothing happening? Where are the blockages in this?
I think, I wrote an article, I think about 2 months ago, actually asking the very same question and actually addressing us to our parliament, asking them what is it that is actually blinding them from realizing the devastating effect of this draconian labor legislation. And to my disappointment, no one has ever actually responded to me, because when we launched this court case as the Free Market Foundation against Section 32 of the Labor Relations Act, the only people who actually engaged me has been people coming from the labor organization. And I have a lot of respect for labor organization, because they represent the interest of their members. But at the same time, Parliament is not there to represent only the few employed labor organizations. They are there to represent South Africa. They represent, including the 7 to 8 million poor South Africans. Why our Parliament is actually totally ignoring them, for me, is beyond understanding.
Okay, but let's look at it rationally now. There has to be a rational reason for this. Is it perhaps because there's a perception that business is still white and labor is still black, and it's a hangover from the apartheid era that we don't want to give or take? Or is it that kind of issue?
But I think, Alec, why do we have to really loud the status of poor people bring race into the mix? Whether business is white or black or is any other color, what we're talking about almost 8 million South Africans really quite desperate. And the people who can really get them out of this poverty is the business community. And that business community has got absolutely nothing to do with the race. What we need to really look at, let's really look at what is it as a country we can do that can steer and trigger economic activity and encourage South Africans, black and white South Africans, to really drive that process so that our people can be given opportunity to work.
Looking at the labor cost, or the impact of that on capital costs on a company, we've recently seen BMW announcing that they've lost an export contract as well as production in South Africa due to the labor unrest. How does that impact businesses overall? Because I'm sure it doesn't come at a cheap cost.
Well, I think I saw an article last night where obviously I think some claims are made that BMW is using blackmail tactics. I think this affects of life, and I think if as a country we're going to really ignore the sentiments and genuine sentiments coming from the business community, we can really do this to our detriment. I think it's really unfortunate for us as a country to still 20 years down the line in our democracy, still really regarding business as the enemy of the people. I think one has to really look at it from a historical perspective. And I think the other day I addressed a group that I think for us as South Africans, we're making a terrible mistake because we are under impression when we are fighting the evil system of apartheid, we are fighting business, we are fighting capitalism. In the meantime, we are fighting an evil system of apartheid, which has nothing to really do with capitalism. So I think we need to find a way as a country to really address this issue so that we really understand the difference between business activity and apartheid. You know, so we still hang on to this, and then in the process we have poor South Africans really getting the brunt of this draconian legislation.
It's actually scary if you think about apartheid was socialist, but for a very small group of society. Yeah. Herman, what about your own experiences? Because clearly you are passionate about this, you're outspoken about it. You've been through the mill yourself in your own business.
I think I like to really look at my situation. You know how I've developed, where in 2005, eventually with this draconian labor legislation, I had to actually outsource my manufacturing. Because I think, you know, you really look at it as business. How do you really deal with this complex labor legislation? And you can imagine now, I wasn't as small as most of the business we've really been taken out by this labor legislation over many years. So I strongly believe as a country, if we continue on this trajectory, we can only really do this to the detriment of small business, which is responsible for the employment of our people. We know for the last 20 years of our democracy, big business has been growing, making money, but employing less people. And they're not doing this because they don't want to employ people. They mechanize, they're using some of the best legal brains in terms of dealing with this complex labor legislation. But what about a small guy in Alexander or Soweto or Venda or Mashi for that matter, who needs to really employ people and be forced and be expected to comply the same as a big company? So where do they get the resources and the capacity to deal with this complex labor legislation? Honestly, I think we need to really find ways where our parliamentarians have to really take responsibility for this.
So let's touch on entrepreneurship. You started off as an entrepreneur yourself with the boom in Black Like Me. What can we do to help stimulate the SMME sector in South Africa?
We need to really appeal to our parliamentarians to really take the responsibility, do away with certain labor legislations that are making it difficult for small business in particular to really survive.
Herman, some might say that you're putting too much on Parliament at the moment.
I think we've really been debating, really looking at other side matters. The core of the matter in this country, I strongly believe. That is why, as the Free Market Foundation, we've ultimately decided to really go to our courts. Even if it means we must go to the Constitutional Court, this is where this case is going, so that we can, as a country, debate this matter. Because I don't want to really discuss side matters. We have really been discussing side matters for a long time. I really want to go to the core of what I believe has been instrumental in getting us where we are today.
How do you get somebody who doesn't want to listen to you to change their mind?
That is why I've said we're left with no option than to go to the courts. I'm sure everyone in this country knows you can really go back to investigate the last 10 to 15 years, how every time I had an opportunity to in a public platform, discuss the state of entrepreneurship in our country. And labor legislation has always been the number one factor, which I believe has been responsible. But now talking, we're getting old, more and more of our people are losing jobs, and I don't really believe we've got the time on our side. And the only option honestly left, it's our courts, and that's what the courts are there for. And we're going to really explore this opportunity, and the Constitutional Court will make that determination whether we're right or wrong. But I strongly believe as a South African that there's definitely something drastically wrong with our labor legislation. That is, I believe, we just cannot really make two wrongs and expect to really get it right. Yes, I accept the fact that during apartheid our people were exploited, but we replaced that evil system. We cannot replace it with another evil and expect to really get a different outcome. And we're sitting with unemployment that unfortunately, if we don't really do something, it's going to, the whole situation will explode on us.
Sounds like a strong mind shift change there that needs to take place, okay?
If you can't hire, Sorry, if you can't fire, you can't hire.
Absolutely.
It's the reality of the world.
And at the same time, I don't really believe that we can only leave it to the politicians to really make the determination where I must work and who must employ me. I think let us really start really respecting our people, that they have the brains and the capacity to really make those determinations on their own.